different size plate on it, trying to drill out all the rivets on it, I'm gonna sell it.
You gotta live with it.
But I had a
But we have another home.
80%
I think a good
side
body
plate that was
goes
put on
along.
it many years ago. And I had to stare at one of our secretaries on it, but I had to agree on my name. And being a builder. Yeah, that's not a good idea to sell stuff. That's what they advise. Yeah. You know, I overdoes.
Yeah, they knew that the weather was going to potentially be bad.
Years.
There's two of them, Kareen and another guy who have good experience, it sounds like. Winter backpacking. But the rest of them did not. So they've been telling them what to do, and hopefully they're not in the news. Episode. 8. Romans. All right, before we begin, Bob, would you send a word of prayer? Thank you.
Righteous Father in heaven, we thank you for the Lord's Day that we together in our temple and read your word, study it. Help us, Father, to open our hearts, our minds, and absorb these things that we're studying today. Be with those of our number who are not able to be here today. Help us to help them in any way we can. Strengthen us all and help us to work together to glorify your name. And we ask this in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
All right, as we get going here, what has Romans been about so far? If you were to say, what's the big picture of Romans? As we're coming into chapter 8, what has been the big picture?
Justification by faith.
Okay, justification by faith, and why is he nailing on this justification by faith? Why is that an important thing for this audience?
They're mostly Jews, and they don't do the works of the law.
Okay, so we've got Jews who think they need to do the works of the law. We have Gentiles who converted to Christianity and have been in Rome for a long time. The Jews got kicked out of Rome by a decree, and they've now moved back. So we kind of, in a way, kind of think of like these are kind of pretty seasoned Christians by this point. And then we've got new Christians. We've got a bunch of people, and it's like this blended family of sorts. And a lot of the conversation is really directed towards the Jewish audience. As we entered in this, he specifically says, I'm talking to those who know the law. Most likely the Jews, perhaps some proselytes, right? But the people who know the law. And one of the big things that we see throughout all of the New Testament, the same struggle, which is we have a blended family. We have a group that's being grafted together. God's family looks different than it did before, and we've got some problems that we have to work out. And the justification by faith is really great because it brings back to everybody in God's family is in God's family because of the same reason. Not because of how you were born, not because of what you've done, not because of like a whole lot of different things, not because who your parents were, but because you are justified by faith. That's what brings you into the family. It doesn't matter who you are, all of you.
The point is also that it's not because of your righteousness that you are saved, but it points out that you're directed to now the love of Christ.
Right.
Now the grace there, we have that hope for eternity.
And isn't that great? Like all of the family, though the family is distinct and has different things. We've seen that even up to this point. Like what was the point of being Jewish? What came from that? And he goes in and says, the advantage of being Jewish was like we were the keepers of the law. We were the keepers of all these things that we were supposed to show the world what a great thing it was, right? That was the advantage of it. But in the end, it all comes down to Christ and faith. And everybody is part of that family for the same reason. Okay, so now as we come into 8, you'll remember as we were finishing 7, I had mentioned that Greek word is sarx. And so over and over again, he's talking about, when he talks about the flesh, he's talking about sarx, which is that animal appetite that we have. And that's kind of what it appears almost like what we're driven by, right? And so we're almost like fighting against that. But verse 4 is, well, I guess might as well just start 1. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So despite all this other stuff, There's no condemnation, like none. That's a very freeing statement, isn't it? That when we think about what freedom means, when we think about being free in Christ and unburdened, it allows us to just continue to move on, move forward, to strive, as opposed to being like knocked down because of condemnation and feeling constant guilt, right? We don't have to do that. We can just say, I'll do better. Right? You sin, you turn around and go, okay, I sin. I'll do better. Right? That's very free. Okay. There's no who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. So those who, like, we're not, this is verse 4, we're not to walk according to our animal appetites. That thing that we looked at through the Old Testament too, right? Like in Genesis we saw that. The animal appetite is not what we walk in, but we walk in the Spirit instead. And that's, by the way, what makes us the creation of God, this human thing that he created. It's what makes us different, is we're able to do that. We have a spirit that God has given us that can take and reason and think, how do I control that animal appetite part of us? Okay. So, I assume you talked a bit about being adopted as sons. So let me talk just a moment about what that means from 2 points of view as we come into this. So, as a Jewish, listener to this, the first thing you have is this concept of the Bahor. And as we come in actually into chapter 9, it will be very strongly stated, but we'll point it out so we can recognize it better, this conflict between the idea of Bahor and everyone else. So who was the Bahor? Do you remember in the Old Testament, who's considered, or in Jewish speech, who's the Bahor? So the Bahor is the firstborn. And the firstborn has certain types of things that they need to do. One of the things that the Bahor is supposed to do is the Bahor partners with their parent to teach the siblings how the family works. It's their job. Their job as the oldest child is to make sure that the siblings of the family understand how the family works. They partner with their father to do this. It's a lot of work. Being the Bahor is a ton of work. Bahor? It's Bahor. It's Bechhor. It's it is, when we see firstborn, it's the Jewish word for firstborn, the Bahor. And it's a very special word. God calls, in fact, his people as they come out of Egypt, the Bahor. Hello. So the Bahor then is this firstborn, and the firstborn is going to partner with their father to teach the children how the family works, what it's supposed to do. The Bahor gets a reward for that. Do you remember what the Bahor's reward is? Being the firstborn, what's your reward? The inheritance is a double portion. And a double portion, all that really means is if there are 5 children, what you do is you divide the estate in 6 parts. And so the Bahor, the oldest, will get 2 parts, and everyone else will get their 1 part. Okay, so that's how that would work. Now, when we think about adoption is the opposite of being the Bahor. Adoption is the opposite of being a child. It's being made a child. It's bringing someone in who wasn't a child, right? And from a Roman point of view, when you are adopted, you are a full heir of everything. And if we think about the Caesars would not very often give their empire to actually a natural born child. Their empire would go to an adopted child almost every time. They would find somebody who looked like what they wanted, characteristic-wise, who had the attributes of what they wanted inside of the next Caesar, and they would adopt them as their own, and they would become as if the firstborn, and from that, they would then be given the kingdom. And this happens over and over and over again through the breaks of the Caesars. This is a really common thing, that they would adopt somebody in who has the characteristics they want, they continue to train them in their ways, and then they would go ahead and give them the kingdom. And so when we come into adoption, we think about adoption from the point of view of the Romans and the Jews, and we'll see more in chapter 9 of the Jewish point of view. What we're going to see is that the adopted child is the chosen child. Sometimes we think of the adopted child maybe as like someone who you are simply providing grace to, right? Or someone who you're providing an opportunity to. But in a Roman world, the adopted child is the chosen child. It's the one that you wanted so that you could promote them into the position you wanted them to be in. You adopted them not just out of compassion, but you adopted them because you really wanted them, right, to be part of you. And so when we think about adoption in the Roman world, we want to think about God's desire isn't as if I'm just giving grace and compassion to this other group, but he desires that other group to be part of the family. Like that's the way it's supposed to be. He really wants it to be that way. And in that adoption in the Roman world, as you're adopted in, it's as if you were a natural child. You have all the same benefits, all the same things that any natural family member would have. And so when Paul says that all of these folks are now adopted into one, that's another way of saying that there is no distinction between those who were Jews and those who are now adopted into the family. They're all one. They all have equal status.
So it's almost like well, it is like when God created man, created them in his own image, so they become like the part of the image of God. So there's no distinction anymore.
Right.
It is one, a
Yeah.
family
Yeah,
in the image of God.
that's right. Yeah, one big family, right, in the image of God. All there for the same reason, because of the same reason. They all have faith, the same faith. Not a Jewish faith, but the faith of Abram, right? That's a different thing. Like everybody is there for the same reason, because of the same reason, and they all have an equal status along the way. And that's an important message that Paul's trying to give, because this is like a group of people from all these different backgrounds. It's a very blended, mixed family. And he's got to try to tell this blended, mixed family, you are all here at the same level and same status. You're all just equally as important. It's not just like the Gentiles are somehow lesser brothers. They're adopted, which in a Roman sense means they are equal. They're the same. Okay. So, and that plays into this as we're starting in verse 16. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs also, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may be also glorified with him. All right, so one more thing about Roman legalism. Being an heir, so in our world today, right now, if you were an heir, what does that mean? Yes. You inherit what they leave behind. And for them to leave it behind, they have to do what? They have to die. Yeah, okay. So in a Roman world, that's not what it means.
And so this is another thing that we have to kind of like play into, we have to adjust our mentality for what it means in the day. To be an heir means simply that you are going to be shared in the ownership and the control of the estate once you become of age. And your father will set that age. Your father doesn't have to die. So to be an heir in the Roman world, and we, by the way, we will see this wording in Galatians when we hit it. Paul describes this in a very Roman way in Galatians, using the same terminology. When the child becomes of age, they are joint partnership in controlling the estate and ownership of everything. Okay? So, in that, in that world, it was often about the time that you would grow a good beard. Not one of those, flaky beards that are just like the spriggly stuff that just comes out. I gotta shave that off. But once you get a good beard, that's about the time you become an heir. And so, becoming an heir, as opposed to the way we often think about it, is it means that the parent has died and now you've taken something on and worked on it. Being an heir in a Roman world means you are partnering and working with the parent to bring about whatever it is that they do. Let's say that they run a bakery and you are the heir. It means when you become of age, your interest is in making sure that the bakery continues to run properly. You partner with your parent to make sure that all the assets are doing what they're supposed to and the business is running the way it's supposed to run. And when we think about actually heir, in the same sense that it means in Roman sense, when we read this, we can see basically, again, this idea that God calls his people to be partners with him. It's not that God dies and we inherit something like that, right? It's that we become joint partners with God in what it is that is our Father's task. Whatever our Father is, we are joint partners with him to try to achieve that. That's the Roman concept of being an heir. And I love that, when we put it back in, because that's what God keeps calling his people to do over and over again. And so here when he says, you're not just adopted children, but that makes you heirs. Heirs of the thing that the Father wants to achieve, and therefore we become partners in that. Let's go ahead and have a couple questions.
Michael, I don't know if this is even, I don't want to say close, what happens in a Jewish family when there are no male children brought in?
There's a whole Old Testament full of rules about what happens when that occurs. The women actually inherit property. One of the first societies that we know of that ever did that. They actually have rules and rights, and when they marry, then there becomes this interesting. But yeah.
Isn't it part of the culture also in the old days that some of the king reign of like their son and ruling the same what you're trying to explain? Isn't it part of the culture?
Yeah.
In some ways, I think is it Nebuchadnezzar's father also and him who.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar was his father. Nebuchadnezzar was like chief general, but when we read about Nebuchadnezzar going out and destroying things in that first bit, he's not king. His dad's king. And then when at the end, he's in Egypt, and he comes through, ransacks Jerusalem, grabs Daniel and his friends, and then continues on. He does that because he gets a message that his father has died, and he's headed back actually to take the throne before someone else does. But yeah, it's not uncommon that kings who didn't feel threatened by their heir would co-partner in trying to bring up and run the business, right? Which is a kingdom then at that point. And so it could be a bakery, or it could be a kingdom, right? But your job as an heir is to co-run that at the same time that your father's alive. Okay, so let's continue on. okay, this idea of suffering, let me also just add this. Fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may be glorified with him. Like, what kind of suffering is going on?
Suffering for persecution.
Okay, there's real persecution, right? Not like what we pretend. Like real persecution is happening in Rome. Even I would even almost say, when he refers to light afflictions, becoming exiles and kicked out and out of your home, right? Like all the Jews got kicked out of Rome. Sorry, you can't live here anymore. Instant refugee. You gotta go somewhere else. Cannot be here, right? I think that's light affliction from Paul's point of view. We would consider that just abhorrent, right? That'd be pretty amazing. When he's talking suffering here, he's talking about like real suffering that they're taking on. Who else suffered? It's like Christ suffered. And we are, if we're to be children, we're in joint heirs, then we're part of our Father's work, and we should probably expect that we're going to be treated the same way, right? Like, we shouldn't expect something different along the way. This idea of being joined and being part of this, he continues on in verse 18, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. The suffering that occurs during this as we're doing our Father's work, as we're joining with him and in this partnership, it's nothing compared to the glory of what comes later. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, how many times, if you just look at Paul, right, as an example, like, how many times has that man been stoned? Multiple times he's stoned, and he's whipped, and he's like shipwrecked, and like, just, the poor guy is just like over and over and over again, and yet, he's like, okay, whatever. Compared to the glory of what's to come. And we can look at that a couple different ways. Like, we can look at it as, I'm doing the work of my Father, I shouldn't expect anything different along the way. And that glory that is to come could even actually be glory that's here. We often think about it as later in earth, in death. But the glory also comes in doing the work and seeing it succeed. Think about Paul's joy as he writes about the success that he has along the way. He doesn't very often write about the hardship along the way, right? He's just filled with joy that hardship along the way brings incredible success and other people see Christ, right? And that glory is here. That's not a glory later, that's a here thing that has occurred. He's pretty excited about it.
It kind of describes when the Roman victorious parade is that glory that they're marching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that, but it also talks about exactly what you're saying in 2 Corinthians 4:17. It says, "For this light momentary afflictions is preparing for us an eternal way of glory beyond all comparison."
Light affliction. And compared to that day, we experience nothing, right? So
We would only experience that when all these things that we go through, the pain of separation of our loved ones, and the thing that goes through here. Those, to some of us, experience some of that separation. But when you're there, I could only imagine what it says on the Bible, that when we're there in heaven, it's all for eternal, and you no longer it's gonna have drop of tears and pain in this life, but for all eternity. So when you're up there, there's no comparison of what you're going through, the pain here.
okay, let's continue. Verse anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its slavery and corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having been the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. It's as if the earth itself, from the beginning of creation, has been itself, all of creation, longing and waiting for this day. That's amazing, right? Not just those who are created in the image of God, but creation itself has been longing for this and waiting for this. And verse 24, for in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what they already see? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. Okay, what does it mean to have hope? Does anybody remember that Greek term hope? What does it mean? Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yeah, confident expectation. It's not like we use it generally to mean hopeful thinking or wishful thinking, right? That's kind of how we use it in our language today, is wishful thinking. But it's confident expectation is how it's used in Greek. So he's basically saying we're confident and we expect it to occur, but we haven't seen it yet, because then it wouldn't be hope anymore. Like if you've seen it, it's there, right? So another way of thinking about that, is that not what faith is? Confident expectation is basically faith, right?
A good one that describes that is on Hebrews 11. You know, they have not attained it, but yet they sense it there. They long for, they know the city where they were searching for, the city whose foundation and the builder is God. They sense that, like they long for that because they know that you have not actually acquired yet, but you sense it.
Yeah.
The same thing with our what's that, longing or groaning or
Yeah.
Anticipation.
Yeah. Okay. And then that end of verse 25, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. And that is an interesting set of words. How can you persevere and wait? Like wait sounds like doing nothing, and persevere sounds like you're doing something. So how do we persevere and wait for this? Wait eagerly for it.
Yeah, waiting seems to be an active term.
Yes. Yeah. Waiting. So waiting is not always passive. To wait on the Lord sometimes means doing nothing and being patient and still and knowing, having faith that God will do his part in something. But that's not the same as not doing something along the way, right? And persevering is a doing. And sometimes waiting, especially if you're eagerly waiting, requires a doing. And sometimes that doing isn't like an action, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it's keeping yourself in a frame of mind. Sometimes it's remembering that we're in the spirit and not in the flesh. Sometimes it's just simply remembering that I'm a partner with God in this process, and as an adopted child, I do what it is that my Father desires. I'm promoting what the Father has set up. I don't get to set my own thing. That's not my job as an adopted child. I don't get to set up my own thing. As an heir, I take my Father's thing and I continue to promote my Father's thing. And that is part of eagerly waiting, right? Yeah.
says, not that I already attain of that kind of life, but, you know, but daily, it's a perseverance, overcoming the sufferings that we face. Why? Because we want that life there.
Right. Yes.
In relation to the coming of Christ, we're told to be ready and watch and wait. All those kind of similar to the same situation.
Yeah. Again, action, right? It's involved.
One knows Paul who fall under the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they do.
Self-control.
These are not sleeping disciples
No,
out in the garden, though.
there's an entire book about some sleeping disciples, people who are waiting and expecting that Christ is going to arrive anytime, and Paul writes a letter to them, which I'm sure somebody will study, right? Like, it's not what you're supposed to be doing.
Well, along with that, it's that thing Christ is teaching, that he will be coming as a thief in the night. Well, so you have to anticipate, and that's the way we should be thinking, because we can't just be casual, because you know, you gotta have the fire in the belly, like Brother Phil keeps saying, right? We have to try focus to have that,
Yes.
because otherwise we'll be sleeping like the disciples in the garden. So that's our life. If you want it to be in heaven, you can't just be casual. We are journeying, and along the way, there's the trials, tribulation, the perseverance we have to have in order for us to attain that life. We can't just be relaxing in some ways.
Okay, so now he's been talking about sarks originally, right? And then we've gotten into that animal appetite. We've got this like between the flesh or the sarks, and we've got the spirit. And now he's talking about like, well, but you're adopted, and you're going to anticipate, and you're going to work with your father as an heir would. You're going to do these things, but there's going to be some tribulation because there's some for your father. It's the same thing, and it. You know, you're going to eagerly wait for it, and you're like, man, none of this is easy. And so as we come into 26, it's like, Paul knows, none of this is easy. In the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness. For we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes with us, with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches the heart knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Like you feel weak in this? Of course you do. But that's okay. You pray to your Father, you talk to your Father, and you feel inadequate in that? That's okay. Because the Spirit joins you. It knows what your inner being is trying to say to your Father, and it helps intercede with that. How beautiful is that, right? Like, I don't know how many times you've had, I had a whole week of this, in which I'm trying to explain something to somebody, and I'm trying to articulate it in a way that they understand it, and I'm not sure I'm doing a good job of it, right? But then, when we talk about going to our Father and speaking to God, like the creator of all, the sustainer of everything, like, how do I even approach him? How do I do that even, right? I feel inadequate. I feel like all these different things, but my Father wants to hear from me. And I need to bring my weakness so that I can be made strong. And in that, even though I don't have the words, the Spirit understands. And it can intercede between what I have in me that I can't figure out how to speak out so that my Father will hear me.
There is such a powerful call to, I'm going to use the term aliveness in Romans 8. We cannot miss that. All through it, in various ways,
if you wanna be an heir, you're active in that process. You don't get to just like sleep to 10. If you got a bakery. Maybe you get to sleep to 10 if you do like, you know, something else like grave robbery, right? Maybe that was a bad example. Like there's like something else maybe you get to sleep, but not that.
There's gotta be a goal set. What is that goal? You don't want the bakery to fail.
Right. Yeah.
So the same thing with us. We want to be awakened. We want to be alive. We want to be active because we want to earn that life. That's our goal.
All right, we've got like 5 minutes, which is not enough time to really do the next section, but what I think 5 minutes, I have enough time to set it up for you to think about this. So, who knows what an oracle is? An oracle.
It's kind of a law or a
It's a what?
revealing.
A revealing? Yeah, there's a revealing in an oracle. So, there are about 5 main locations called oracles. And you would go to an oracle, the location, often looks like a temple, to hear from an oracle, who is a person, to get an oracle. So the oracle is the message. There's also the term oracle to mean the person giving the oracle. And the oracle is also a place. You may have heard of the oracle at Delphi. Delphi is a location where the oracle is, the temple-ish thing, the building. And in that building is an oracle, the oracle of Delphi. And she would sit on this thing above mercury vapor. That's probably part of the reason, problem. But she would sit on this thing, and you would go to her to get an oracle, a message from the gods that would tell you what to do. And how oracles would be explained when they were given to you is, if you offer blank, whatever it is, if you offer blank, and you do blank, this thing, it is predestined that blank will occur. That's how an oracle is always delivered in these 3 parts. If you offer this thing, and you do this thing, it is predestined that this thing will occur. That is the message of an oracle.
Sounds like salvation.
So,
What you need to do for salvation.
well, it ends up that Paul uses terminology that is always uses terminology that is understood by his culture, his people. Now, if you were to decide that I'm going to make my offering to the God, but I really don't want to do the thing that the oracle has told me to do, am I going to get the result that I want? No, you're not going to get the result. Are you predestined to have that result?
So it's like
Yeah, you're predestined to have the result, but you didn't do the 2 things. You didn't provide the offering and do the thing.
So is it grace through faith then? Grace through faith.
Well, we'll see how Paul uses it here in a moment. But this language is a language that uses you are predestined to have this, for this to occur in your life. You were predestined to have that, but in order for you to get that, you have to do what the oracle has said. You have to provide the offering and do the thing.
You have to do the ifs. You will get this if you do that.
Yeah, but it's just like a package deal.
Condition. It is a condition.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean you're not predestined for it. You were predestined for it in the oracle. You're predestined for this, but there are requirements on it, right? And you always have to perform the requirements in order to get the thing. But the language is such that you are predestined for this fate. But you got to do these other things.
When I said what I did, I was thinking of the big picture of what God has given us.
Yeah.
God said, you will get this if you accept Jesus Christ as my son. That's almost like the format of the oracle which you just defined.
Kind of, and I'm just going to read now this next verse, and then I'll leave it, and then we'll talk about it verse 28, chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. And these whom he predestined, he also called. And these whom he also called, he also justified. And these whom he justified, he also glorified. Paul is using the same terminologies that an oracle would here. We sometimes get wrapped up in this idea of what predestination means and lose our minds as we continue to read and miss a bunch of stuff. And so as we come into next week, I want to spend a little bit of time making sure we understand this and see what it is, how this message here that he's given matches the same format as what an oracle type predestination is. You're predestined that these things will occur based upon these other things. And God's done the same thing with us. And we'll talk more about that. So maybe think about that, read through this,